What's going on YouTube? It's Tej, back again with another video, and today we are ranking all 8 new NFL head coaching hires, as well as dishing out some grades on what I think about this. And before we jump into it, I just want to be pretty transparent. I will be an optimist on a lot of these new hires. I like to think that hiring a new head coach hopefully spurs positive change. We all know that doesn't always happen. You have your Josh McDaniels of the world when he went to Vegas, and things just sometimes don't work out. But if you're looking for someone who's going to give like an F for one of these hires, this is not the video for you. That is just not who I am. I'm going to try to look on the bright side. C+ obviously is the lowest grade that we'll get into, but going to go team by team and hire by hire. Give quick thoughts of that. And I am taking a head coach, offensive coordinator, and defensive coordinator to some extent into the equation, but this is mostly the head coaching hire. So we start with Jerod Mayo. And look, again, still positive about this. Looking forward to see what this is. When you're coming off the greatest head coach, in my opinion, in NFL history, you want to have some of that stay the same, but you're also looking for a fresh new voice and a kind of a younger approach to it and a re-energizing kind of look at it. And I think Jerod Mayo kind of checked all those boxes. That's why I can see a world where they're like, hey, they put this in his contract for a reason. They forego the search. They have their guy already in-house. So I'm excited to see what this all looks like. Obviously, a guy that's never been, a defensive play caller, so that's a little different for sure. Nonetheless, I think I think he earned the opportunity to be that successor to Bill Belichick, and the fact that they have this in his contract says a lot. Granted, they had the same thing in for Josh McDaniels. We've seen what that looks like as a head coach. But I think this guy gets the Patriot way. Former player, too. I think that's a huge step in the right direction for this team, right? Like, not that Bill Belichick, couldn't connect to players on that level, but Jerod Mayo definitely can. So I'm excited to see what this looks like moving forward. Alex Van Pelt's the OC. Hasn't been calling plays the last couple of years in Cleveland. That's been Kevin Stefanski. So I'm excited to see what that looks like. Also another former player, former quarterback. So, I'm eager to see what that all means. And I wonder if that has any inclination, coming from Cleveland, working with Deshaun Watson, who had mobility. Like, is this team keying in on Jane Daniels at 3? I want to know what all that means. And then not keeping Steve Belichick in as the DC. I understand where it's like, hey, you got to cut ties with the family too, So, but yeah, really eager to see what this looks like. Again, this is not a negative thing. It's just, we haven't seen him be a head coach. We haven't seen him be a defensive play caller. But I think he gets the culture side of it. I think he gets the tone. He knows the Patriot way. But I think he adds a little bit more and the ability to connect with players, which I'm really excited to see what that does for that team. Not only what's already there, but also like luring free agents, right? Like I could see that being a big selling point. Then we get to Brian Callahan again. Nothing against the guy, just not one that I was and hey, when I did head coaching predictions, he was one of the guys I left out. I personally didn't get it. Was the OC, yes, in Cincinnati, but not a play caller. Honestly, I think the biggest W of this hire is getting his dad to come out of retirement, Bill Callahan, who has the Midas touch for offensive lines. Everywhere he goes, they just seem to get substantially better. So working on an offensive line that absolutely needs to be better, that's a huge W. That's as big a win out of this hire I think there can be. And working, especially with a young guy like Peter Skoronski, this is a team that almost every mock you look at, they're taking a tackle at 7. That could be huge too. So, and I also think, Brian Callahan coming from Cincy, and the offensive line background with his dad, I think that's going to be huge because that's going to be an investment this team continues to make. But also, this is a guy coming from Cincinnati who, as a franchise, has made huge investments with Jamar Chase, with T. Higgins, and among others, even paying a Tyler Boyd before those guys got there. I think he's going to be the guy kind of shepherding that new direction. Hey, yeah, we put a first rounder to Treylon Burks, but it can't just be, oh, yeah, we have one receiver. Even with A.J. Brown, it was they have one guy. And then Corey Davis was fine as the number 2. He was good enough. But yeah, I'm really excited to see them kind of turn away from, hey, we've been a grounded pound, win through the run game and defense type of franchise the last couple of years to where it's hey, Brian Callahan might be the guy that kind of shepherd them into a new era where, hey, we're going to have to win through the air. We're going to need a good offensive line to do that. We're going to need good receivers. So I'm excited for what this means on the offensive side. Really curious to see how the defensive coordinator situation plays out. At the time of this recording, I don't think there's a DC. But yeah, and Will Levis was my QB2 last year. I had 4 quarterbacks, all in my top 10 on my big board. I thought highly of all 4 of those guys at the top of the QB class last year, and I all thought there's a lot of upside. As a big Will Levis guy, I'm not super stoked about having a guy that I wasn't entirely sold on why he should be a head coach. I wasn't making a case for Callahan like I was with some of the other guys. And now I had to pin my hopes of Will Levis to Brian Callahan. So I'm hopeful to be wrong. Like, I really do. And I do think there's a lot of things that kind of lead you to believe, and I can see where Tennessee's looking at, like, this guy coming from Cincy, he's going to have us prioritizing the things that we need to be prioritizing. And again, his dad, former NFL head coach, former offensive line coach, like, he does come from a good pedigree there. It's kind of in his genes, so to speak. There's reasons why I understand it. Just wasn't one for me, so that's why he gets a, still B-, still solid grade, but he's at, 7 out of 8. But at least we've seen him as an OC. We haven't really seen Jerod Mayo in that spot. Antonio Pierce, this was, to me, this was the move they should have been making, like, no doubt about it. He got more out of that roster than I thought they had any business getting out of it. I mean, like, just even going to Kansas City. Yeah, Aiden O'Connell throws for 62 yards. The Chiefs don't play a crisp game for sure, but also, like, even when the Chiefs haven't played crisp, they've wiped the floor with the Raiders more often than not, So, man, and I think he could definitely be that CEO type. My worry here is, now granted, Cliff Kingsbury is not who I was really worried they were going to bring in Mike Sullivan just because he was the OC in New York for a little bit while I was there, and as a team captain, I'm glad that he's branching out beyond that. Really curious to see what this Cliff Kingsbury offense looks like, after a little bit of a time off. Now he's just calling plays, not having to be a head coach and a play caller, so, maybe there's opportunity for him to grow. Glad they kept Patrick Graham. To me, he's doing so much on that side of the ball that's so good, and maximizing the talent that they have on that side of the ball. Because I think they're getting better results than names on paper on that side, if that makes sense. And I think that's just kind of the Antonio Pierce, kind of like Dan Campbell, where it's just like he's making the situation better. He's a great front of the locker room guy. In a lot of ways, I think the Monday to Saturday coaches are kind of dying off. Antonio Pierce, Dan Campbell are kind of the two guys that make a little bit of an exception. Both former players, both just kind of have that tough, hard-nosed mindset, so maybe that's the reason why it's working. Meanwhile, like the Monday through Saturday coaches, if you're not a former player, maybe that just doesn't click quite as well. I mean, we'll see. There's still a few of those guys left in the league for sure. But yeah, I think Antonio Pierce turned around that locker room. And I mean, when you have a guy like Max Crosby, Defensive Player of the Year candidate, saying like, I'm going to request a trade if he's not our head coach, I mean, that just speaks volumes about how much he has galvanized that roster, and that's a guy they want to play for. So now he's got to be the CEO. He's got to approach this like, I'm leading this company. I don't need to, be the guy working the assembly line. Just kind of a weird example. I'm not the one necessarily making the product. I need to be making the decisions, the right decisions for how that's going to kind of trickle down. So like the OC hire, like Cliff Kingsbury, this needs to be a good hire. Like, and keeping Patrick Graham, I think was the right decision. So as long as he nails those OCDC decisions, I could see, I think he's got the leadership standpoint down pat. So this could definitely work out, and that's why I was like, yeah, you got to go in this direction. Plus, they spent big money on Gruden, and I think it could have worked, but obviously extenuating circumstances kind of ended that one halfway through its contract. And then, Josh McDaniels was a disaster. So this was the right move. Like, don't worry about the schematic side of it. Get a guy who, at the front of the locker room, everyone wants to play for. And I also think like Vegas is an interesting place that I think a lot of players would want to go to. And I think Antonio Pierce is a guy that players would want to go play for. So now this becomes a really interesting team to watch in free agency and things like that. Then we got Dan Quinn, just narrowly ahead of Antonio Pierce. You could easily flip those, and I wouldn't hate it. I've seen a lot of flack on this, and like I get it. And it does kind of feel like Ron Rivera 2.0. But I also think Dan Quinn's a better coach than Ron Rivera. Like even just like before like they get their head coaching opportunity. Like Washington hired a retread coach, with Ron Rivera, and it's like, yeah, he's a 2-time Coach of the Year winner in Carolina, but I think one of those was Cam's rookie year, and like the team was just, they were expecting to go like 3 or 4 wins, and they ended up getting like 500. So it was like, okay, this team exceeded expectations, Coach of the Year award. And then the other one was when they go 15-1 and lose the Super Bowl, and that's Cam won MVP that year. So like you got Superman Cam, and good things happen. So not to take any of that away from Ron Rivera. Again, I think he's a great leader, awesome story, especially with the cancer side when he first got there, and like overcoming that, like great dude. I don't want to take that away from him. I just think Dan Quinn's a better football coach. Like even just like looking at the defensive backgrounds, Dan Quinn's had more success, and also he's been more varied. Like he used to run cover 3 exclusively in Seattle, and then he becomes one of the most man-heavy like defensive play callers in the league, and he's kind of at the forefront of utilizing stunts and twists and generating pressure on the front and taking advantage of like awesome athletes and just creating mismatches against offensive linemen and just creating bad situations for them to try to pick up Micah Parsons screaming by as like a freak athlete. No one can do that. So I think his ability to adapt, adjust, and see where the game's going is much bigger tip and a feather in his cap than it ever was for Ron Rivera. So I think this is just a better version of that hire. I think he is a great leader. I think he's at the forefront of trying to do new things on defense and trying to mix it up. Sometimes he gets a little too aggressive. I think that game against the Packers, there were a couple times where it was like, we need to make a play, so I'm gonna send the house. I think you can trust your players a little bit more. So hopefully, in big moments there, he's not overzealous. I think that was a little bit of a crutch down the stretch for him in Dallas. But nonetheless, I think this is a great locker room guy. Like, and as you're trying to rebuild the image of the Commanders, I know Ron Rivera, again, that was some of his reason for hire post Jay Gruden, but I think Quinn even more so with a new owner and a new GM in there. And then we'll get to see what happens with this offensive coordinator hire. I mean, that's going to be a big thing. But look, I mean, he's the guy who hired Kyle Shanahan, and then Kyle Shanahan became the head coach of the 49ers, right? Like, this guy has done a good job for the most part. Some of the hires after Kyle Shanahan weren't as good, but I think he'll go back to that well. Wouldn't shock me if, like, Michael LaFleur ends up being, like, their offense coordinator. Maybe Kubiak after the Super Bowl. Honestly, Kubiak's probably the guy they'll bring in after the Super Bowl if I had to put any money on it, which I'm fine with. And for the most part, he's given them a lot of autonomy. Like, he never was over the shoulder of Shanahan in Atlanta, telling him what to do. So I like that too. So I think it's just a better version of the Ron Rivera hire. Sure, would have been great to get Ben Johnson, but one, I don't know if Ben Johnson wants that life. But secondly, like, we've also seen Dan Quinn coach a team to the Super Bowl and get to the playoffs multiple times. Like, for all we know, like, Ben Johnson might only want to worry about the offense and doesn't care about any of the other stuff. And because of that, like, the roster underperforms. Like, you just don't know. And, like, I think this guy's a good hirer too. And, like, thinking about it from a CEO standpoint, like, you've got to nail the hiring process. And I feel pretty good about Dan Quinn. We just don't know what Ben Johnson's going to be like. He might be great. He might be bad. He might be somewhere there in between. So this is just a safe hire, which kind of sucks. I know Washington was aiming for higher heights, and I get the frustration, but this is a safe hire here. And I think he's a guy who deserves that second chance as a head coach. Then we get to Dave Canales. And again, you can kind of interchange any of these Bs. I think I like Canales the most. Maybe I'm a little, like, drunk on, like, his presser talking about, like, Bryce Young. Like, that's the guy I want to work with. Like, that's kind of cool to hear, which, coach speak for sure, but he did a great job with Geno, kind of part of the equation, kind of resurrecting Geno Smith's career. We saw what he did with Baker Mayfield. And also, like, again, ability to adapt, that's key to me. Like, sometimes your MO, like, what you rest your laurels on, sometimes they just aren't right. Like, and sometimes they just don't work, or sometimes someone's got a better matchup for you. His ability to adapt midway through the year, like, this team kept trying to run the ball, kept trying to pound the rock, and wanted that to be a big part of their identity. And you got to a point where it's like, hey, well, if we're gonna make a playoff run, things need to change right now. And then all of a sudden, like, Baker Mayfield's chucking it 35, 40 times a game, and all of a sudden the offense is way more efficient, and they're utilizing Rachaad White at, honestly, maybe his better skill set as a receiver than he is as a runner. Like, he started leveraging the best components of everybody on that offensive side of the roster, and all of a sudden this team makes playoffs and they win a playoff game. Like, it just, I think he's a big part of the equation for why the Bucs kind of turn it around, and the willingness to adapt, the willingness to say, like, hey, this isn't working. I wish it was, but it's not, so we have to pivot. That's what I like about it. Also, young coach, comes from an offensive side. I think that would be my preference, which I think that's most people's preference. Like, get an offensive guy, and then, you always have the system there, and then you kind of figure out the DC side. I think this is a guy that's kind of earned his opportunity. It's been a fast track for sure over the last couple of years, but I think he's earned it. I think he's shown enough of the last two seasons, specific Seattle and then Carolina, to where he earns his opportunity. And I also think, like, look, Matt Rule didn't work. Frank Reich, like, this is a different version of this head coaching hire, going young, trying to establish something. Now this is the toughest part. Like, Dave Tepper might see this team start 1-7, and then he'd be just pissed off and then want to fire the guy. Like, I hope that's not the case. Like, I really hope that he gives Canales and Dan Morgan, like, 3 years or so. Like, at least that as, like, a full evaluation period to say, these are the guys you've signed in free agency, these are the guys you've drafted, and this is where they were when they got here, and this is where they are now. Are they better? Are they worse? They're the same. Then you get a fair chance at, like, seeing what Dave Canales is actually as a head coach, as a leader, as a developer. Same thing with Dan Morgan as the GM. So I need Dave Tepper to give him time, because ultimately this hiring might not work out. But if you do it in 8 weeks, odds are he's going to get another chance, because who knows, So hope there's a big enough sample size. I hope Dave Tepper doesn't overreact. But man, hearing him talk about Bryce Young makes me kind of excited to see what he wants to do with that side of the ball. And jeez Louise, if you watched the Panthers at all last year, you know that offense needs an overhaul. And then we get to Raheem Morris. I find myself higher on this hire than most. I felt like he got a ton of unnecessary flack, and I don't get it. I mean, you hear how people talk about him, and yeah, I know everyone's going to talk up their buddy for sure, but well, let's just start about his first head coaching opportunity. He got a head coaching gig at 33. You don't just get that because, people like you. Like, you earned that opportunity. Like, Sean McVay earned the opportunity to be a young head coach. Mike Tomlin earned the opportunity to be a young head coach. And you know what? If you flame out at 33, I'm not as worried about that. If you flamed out, look, Vic Fangio is probably not getting another head coaching job. He got his head coaching gig when he was on the older side in Denver, and it didn't work out. I'm willing to give one of these younger guys a second shot because they've had time to learn, grow, and develop. And also a guy who's been coaching on both sides of the ball. Primarily, you think about him as a defensive coach, but he has a background in some years coaching on the offensive side, including his time in Washington on that crazy 2013 Washington staff. but which I like that a ton. Both sides having that flexibility, but he's a great leader. And also, like, you look at the Rams last year, felt like he got a lot more production out of that side of the ball when you look at the names on paper. Certainly helps having Aaron Donald, no doubt, but like, I felt like he got more out of that unit than they deserved. And also, like, goes from being a Tampa 2 heavy guy when he first gets that head coaching gig in Tampa, and then he pivots and takes over Brandon Staley defense, runs a lot of quarters, and then ultimately over that time in LA, he kind of adapts and changes it and morphs it into his own little style of defense, and it's kind of unique from Staley's. So I love these guys who can adapt and change, and seems like a great leader too. Like a guy that players want to play for, and also a guy that could lure in free agents. The way people talk about him really makes me think that he's going to be a guy that is absolutely a player's coach while also having a great scheme behind him. I'm also a big fan of the Zach Robinson hire at OC. Sounds like that was wherever Morris went, Robinson was going to go, which kind of bumps me out as a Steelers fan. Was hoping that he could be our OC, but fine with the Arthur Smith decision. But I'm a believer in Zach Robinson. I think that he will be a good offensive coordinator. Also, kind of going back to Dave Canales, like the Liam Cohen hire for Tampa Bay. If you're going to replace Canales, like I think Cohen was a pretty good hire. Interested to see what LA does with all these pieces kind of leaving them. Anyways, back on track here. So I like that OC hire, and I am factoring that into the equation some as well. But yeah, I see a great leader, a really bright mind. A second opportunity at being a head coach is kind of exciting. What did he learn that first time through? I think he's only going to be a better head coach now than he was then. And then plus the defensive mind that he brings too. Like, I'm excited about this hire, and I'm definitely higher on it than I feel like a lot of people are. Let me get to the top two. I mean, Mike Macdonald. Like, look, let's just put Ben Johnson on this list. I think after seeing what he did to Houston and just kind of thinking about, like, damn, he had an answer for Shanahan in San Francisco, Macdonald in Miami, and now Houston is one of the hottest offensive leagues. Like, I think right behind the guy who's obviously at number one, because we haven't talked about him yet, I think Mike Macdonald was the second best head coaching candidate. And of the guys who haven't been a head coach before, he was easily the best, like, even more than Ben Johnson. And I stand by that. You never hear, oh, we ran into this buzzsaw of a defense. Like, it's always like, oh, man, we ran into Aaron Rodgers while he was hot. We found Patrick Mahomes during a scorching stretch, and, he's a buzzsaw, so he carved through us. Or we found that, the Shanahan offense is clicking right now. Like, sheesh, there's no one that can stop that. They're a buzzsaw. You never hear that term talked about with a defensive coordinator and a defensive general. But, I mean, Mike Macdonald has been that this year. And, man, again, so varied on the defensive side. He changes and adapts week in and week out. Like, he has a unique game plan for each team that he sees. Like, there's some things that are consistent for sure week in and week out, like how he schemes up pressure. Some of that's the same. But, man, he approaches each game like it's a brand new one, which that sounds so simple. But a lot of coaches will say, hey, this is my defense. This is what we do. I'll throw a couple different wrinkles in there, but for the most part, this is what we're going to do with a few different things intertwined week in, week out. Like, no, Mike Macdonald, for the most, like, week in and week out, he's got something different. Now, some of it, like, when you see Shanahan followed by Mike McDaniel, they're not necessarily the same offense, but in principle, there's a lot of similarities there. So sometimes the schedule certainly helps with, that game prep. But, man, I think this is a great offensive mind. I think, you also have the defense coordinator from DC, from Michigan going to be the DC in Los Angeles. His name's now escaping me, Jesse Minter maybe. But I think that, like, Michigan defense with Macdonald and Minter then now in LA, I think that's become a tree that people start plucking from because, man, it's just, again, it's very varied. It's very adaptable. And just, yeah, I mean, I like this hire a ton. And it almost kind of feels like the Pete Carroll hire in a lot of ways, but you're getting him obviously at a younger age, but like Pete Carroll's cover 3 defense was like stalwart for so many offenses at the time, but the college level, and then it got to the NFL level, and kind of you get the right pieces, it becomes the Legion of Boom. And I could see Mike Macdonald kind of having the same thing. Now, again, it's going to come down to what ultimately happens at OC too, right? Because if this offense falls flat, in the Mike Macdonald era, that defense is only going to get you so far. So he's going to have to nail that hire. But, man, really smart guy, and I just love his ability to adapt and change. And, again, you just don't hear a defense as the buzzsaw. So, like, yeah, I was all about this hire. And, honestly, right behind Harbaugh, who, let's go ahead and pivot to that now, I think he was the best head coaching candidate on the market, even more than Ben Johnson. But, yeah, Harbaugh's the number one. Like, to me, like, when just, like, weighing the candidates, he was the best guy. Like, everywhere he's gone, he's overhauled the program and made him so much better. He took a one-win Stanford team and turned him into a, perennial front-runner in the Pac-12 and kind of live for, big bowl and New Year's bowls at Stanford, and then goes to San Francisco, and like within 2 years on the job, the roster is like 80% different. you have some holdovers like a Vernon Davis type, but for the most part, that defense got overhauled, and it got better for it. And he's also like maximized quarterback play everywhere he's gone. And same thing with Michigan, right? Like the team that can't beat Ohio State, can't get in the college football playoff. Yeah, they lost to Ohio State the first couple of years he was there, but eventually he built up the program and his likeness, and then they won 3 straight against Ohio State, and they're coming off a national championship. Like, everywhere he's gone, he's had those programs reach the heights that were expected. Like Pac-12, we want Stanford to be we want to be contenders. Well, he got them there. And for San Francisco, we want to be like Super Bowl contenders. Well, he got them to Super Bowl. Could have won it, And then Michigan ultimately got him a natty, and they won 3 straight against Ohio State. So. Yeah, I think this was the guy to get. And I think this was the place for him to go. Like, he wants to be in California, but I think this is the team that needs a Jim Harbaugh. I really do think that. They got the quarterback in place, which is great. Again, he maximizes QB play. Really excited to see what that relationship looks like with Harbaugh and Herbert. But if there's going to be a guy that gets that roster in the right spot, to me, it's Jim Harbaugh. And the reason he was the number 1 head coaching hire is I'm not huge on retreads, but also, like, everywhere you go when you have success, that says a lot. So he was a guy that success at both levels, everywhere he's gone, familiar with the area. Also, players love him. He seems like a little bit of a hard ass, but guys love him. So I think he's going to be kind of a draw to the Chargers too. I think this was a slam dunk hire, the exact right hire for the Chargers. Super pumped to see what happens in LA. This is a team that for years now we've been saying there's so much talent. When are they going to compete? When are they going to compete? This feels like the missing piece. Even more so than an addition to the roster. This feels like the component that maximizes everything else that's there and kind of is that missing piece that glues it all together. But guys, let me know what you think about these head coaching hires. What grades would you dish out for Harbaugh, the Morris hire, the Mike Macdonald hire in Seattle? Let me know what your thoughts are down below, and how would you rank them? What was the best hire all the way down to your least favorite hire, maybe? Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hit that like button if you did. Subscribe if you're new to the channel, want to see more football content. A lot more coming down the pike, and of course plenty more mock drafts too if you're in for draft season content. But that's going to do it for me. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Teach, and I'm signing off.